Hello, my name is Lucas, this is a bit of lit, and I'm here to talk about Gyo by Junji Ito. I was feeling like hurting myself, so this month, uh, when I've been incredibly busy, I've been watching a lot of horror movies, and now I've read a horror manga. It's been a couple of years since I read a manga, so I thought it's time, and I'd like to give Junji Ito a chance because I see a lot of high praise for him. And I started with a couple of his short stories, or short mangas, and they were pretty good. So I thought I would try one of his longer ones that he's well known for, and I started with Gyo. Although it's not as popular, most popular, I believe that would be Uzumaki, which I will get to eventually. I'm quite curious about all those spirals. But I read Gyo, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the first half much more than the second half, and I will get into why. So Gyo is the story of a man and a woman, I forgot the man's name, and his girlfriend, Kaori. They go to Okinawa and spend some time in the man's uncle's, like, vacation home in Okinawa, and things don't turn out the way they should for a vacation, although probably the way things always end up for a vacation, because it goes down south quickly when some walking fish start storming the beaches of Okinawa, and yeah, they are coming, they are relentless, and they bring with them the horrible stench of death, which greatly affects Kaori, who becomes very demanding and perhaps whiny towards her boyfriend, who tries to do everything he can. He's very, very loyal to her through all the troubles they have. Yeah, the stench of death comes from these fish with legs, and they can't explain it, they don't understand it. And then more and more come, and eventually even a shark on legs, which they barely, narrowly escape from. The first fish that they got, they put in a bag, and he tried to kill it. And then put it in a bag, and then the bag inflated and it sort of flew away. And they returned to Tokyo. But the walking fish follow them and eventually take over the whole of Japan and the whole of the world. And the boy tells his uncle about this situation, who is a scientist and wants to do further research. So he plans to go to Okinawa until that floating fish in the bag comes back to Kaori and her boyfriend. And Kaori is very sensitive to all smells, particularly this smell of death from the rotting fish, because they open the bag and they find that the fish has completely rotten. And they bring it to his uncle, who does the research. And he finds that these legs are actually part of a machine, a kind of parasitic machine that latches onto a living being and sort of injects it with some kind of disease that makes the living being create a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous amount of gas. Which when you read the novel, it's kind of a gross out thing, because the way the bodies of people morph is pretty horrifying, but it's also just like fart horror. And anyway, he cuts off his arm so that the infection doesn't get to the rest of his body. But Kaori also becomes infected. She doesn't have a machine latch onto her, but she does become infected, and she starts to get boils and her body starts to be full of gas, and eventually she starts burping and farting out a lot of gas, creating what I can only imagine is Junji Ito's greatest horror, a girlfriend who won't stop farting. That's all I could think when I was reading this. Anyway, it's quite an interesting story, because after that, she becomes part of a machine which is built by the uncle. And yeah, the second half is all kinds of gross out body horror, lots of the farting things, and also people getting trapped into these machines, and what that would look like, because the fish have rot out. The body can't produce any more gas, so the machines just kind of die. But people that get infected, they have a hard time kind of controlling themselves, and they get latched onto one of these machines, and then the machine is powered by the gas that's produced. The uncle has a theory about this. It's only a hypothesis. It's not confirmed in the story at all. Although I think it's key and critical, important to understanding perhaps the theme of the story, or one theme. It has his thesis, or his hypothesis on why these machines exist is that he heard a story from his father once, who was part of the Empire of Japan's military during World War II. And when World War II, the war effort was going poorly for Japan, and they were losing more and more. It's believed that by the uncle, he believes that his father talked about the Japanese were looking for any kind of advantage they could get, because they were starting to lose a lot. And one thing that they thought to do was to use smell. Something that smelled really rotten, just as a kind of psychological thing for their advantage. And they did experiments on animals to try and make this happen. And when they're fighting in the jungles or on islands against the Americans, they let the animals loose, but the animals would be paralyzed and die before they got to the Americans, so that didn't work out. But there was another idea that maybe they can use some kind of machine that can transport the animals from point A to point B, that can walk, right? And then the uncle kind of dismisses it as just a hypothesis, a theory, something that his father said in his senility. But it's a possibility, and there's other characters, some students, later in the story, when people are just trying to find out how to live with the way the world is at this point. Because some people are immune to the disease that causes people to burp and fart forever until they rot away. It's also sort of believed that maybe it just was a natural thing that developed, starting with microscopic animal life or plant life, and through some terrible events just sort of organically grew and created. Because it doesn't really make a lot of sense that the experiments would create so many unless they could replicate somehow, right? And also so many big ones that could even carry whales, or seemingly grow to carry multiple humans in one machine. But I think the idea that, even though it's just a hypothesis, the possibility that it comes from these experiments from probably Unit 731, I believe is the name of that unit, or the number for the unit, who were up to all kinds of absolutely horrific experiments during wartime Japan. It's sort of a... I imagine the point of bringing that up is to show that, you know, there's this insidious, dark part of history that kind of is forgotten in a way. I guess, from what I've heard, the way that history is taught in Japan, just like it's taught in America, it sort of washes away the ugly side of what was happening during these more brutal and horrific times. I mean, Shinzo Abe was a denier of the horrors that were going on in Nanjing in China that the Japanese were a part of. So I think, in a way, this story, with it just being a hypothesis, just bringing up this idea that these forgotten elements of history are coming back, will come back to hurt us, or are damaging us to this day. Even if it's just psychologically, right, because it's a horror manga, somehow it's hurting maybe the Japanese psyche to not, I don't know, acknowledge it or work past that as a country or something. I don't really know. That was just kind of what I was thinking. Anyway.